This is the book that I'm going through. This is Charles Dickens' Hard Times, the world's classic. So, an introduction and notes by Paul Schlick, and it is by the Oxford University Press. Well, this is the ISBN number. Open University Set Book. And Thomas Scully writes, Hard Times was written to shake some people in a terrible mistake of these days, as Dickens put in a letter to Thomas Scully. You go through the contents, but what interests me is book the first is sowing, like sowing a seed, the idea. Book the second is reaping. So shall you reap. And the third is garnering, making the best out of it. That's what it is. So I'm just going to read from here. Book the first, Sowing, chapter 1. The one thing needful. Now what I want is facts. Teach these boys and girls nothing but facts. Facts alone are wanted in life. Plant nothing else and root out everything else. You can only form the minds of reasoning animals upon facts. Nothing else will ever be of any service to them. This is the principle on which I bring up my own children. This is how it begins. See how interesting it is. The novel revolves around social and economic conditions of the Victorian era, particularly in industrialized England. He talks about Coketown, and this is during the Industrial Revolution. The novel revolves around the lives of the wealthy and the working class, highlighting the social and economic struggles of the time. It's a satire on the English society, their economic condition. And the story revolves around Thomas Gradgrind, a wealthy industrialist and educator who raises his children, Tom and Louisa, to prioritize facts and reasons over emotions and imagination. The themes are, he talks more about rationalism, self-interest, and facts, and that's it. And the philosophy are on these themes. However, as the novel progresses, Louisa's marriage to the wealthy and arrogant Josiah Bounderby proves loveless and unhappy, while his son Tom's involvement in a bank robbery threatens the family's reputation. So, here he keeps, throughout the novel, you'll find that he critiques, Dickens critiques the dehumanizing effects of industrialization, highlighting the exploitation of workers and the erosion of traditional values. And through this character of Gradgrind, who is a utilitarian educator, he satirizes the notion that people can be reduced to mere facts and figures, emphasizing the need for imagination, empathy, and emotional intelligence. So, while he's talking about facts, the novel starts like that, but he wants to point out that if you just stick to facts and figures, it's a dehumanized society, and he says that it's important that there is imagination, there's empathy, and there's emotional intelligence. And as you read, you'll find the novel exposes the stark contrast between the wealthy elite and the working poor, highlighting issues like poverty, exploitation, and social injustice. And again and again, you'll feel that he's trying to say that there is a need for compassion, empathy, and understanding. So if you go through it, uh, again, and he feels that whatever, if you're talking about education, Dickens argues for a more holistic approach to education, one that balances intellectual development with emotional and moral growth. So, overall, if you see, this novel is a powerful commentary on social and economic ills of Dickens's time. So, as we saw in the novel, he has explicitly mentioned those three portions or the trilogy of sow, reap, and garner. So, sowing, if you see, I mean, we can just talk like that, that sowing highlights the importance of sowing the right seeds, metaphorically speaking. And here in Mr. Gradgrind's utilitarian approach, he's been sowing the wrong seeds, sort of facts and figures. So he prioritizes facts and figures over, actually, he should be sowing emotional intelligence, compassion, and imagination, etc., which he doesn't do that. And as you see that education is, the methods of the time are focused on rote memorization and suppression of emotions in his school. And he contrasts the whole thing with the circus walks like Sleary, who teach valuable life lessons through their unconventional methods. And you really learn a lot. And I'm sure in today's modern world it is like that, especially the developed countries where there's been a sea change from rote memorization to, carrying on project work or trying to find things, encouraging children to do their little research, even from kindergarten, they got to research. They are encouraged to find things out for themselves. Now, in this novel, Harvest, if you're talking about, it can be seen as consequences of the actions and values sown and taught, and the harsh realities of industrialization and the dehumanizing effects of a society that prioritize profits over people. So that should not be it. And Garner is sort of where you make amends. And actually, this main character, he undergoes a significant personal growth. He begins as a strict utilitarian, but eventually recognizes the importance of emotions and imagination. So besides the character that we spoke about, Thomas Gradgrind, there are other characters that drive the narrative of Hard Times, exploring the themes of industrialization, morality, and personal identity. Now, talking about his daughter, who's learnt or has been taught to suppress her emotions. And because of that, she marries just to please her father to a wealthy man who is twice her age. Even as you read, you feel a twinge somewhere. Then you'll come to know about her struggle as you read. Then also about the son. Then you also come to know about a character, Stephen Blackpool, who's a he's a kind-hearted factory worker who becomes entangled in the grad grinds family's lives and serves as a moral compass. And he faces hardships due to the harsh industrial conditions and societal expectations. And his story highlights the struggles of the working class during the Industrial Revolution. Then you also have Sissy Jew, a circus performer's daughter who's taken in by Gradgrinds and represents the power of kindness and compassion, and she really stands out. And in a way, she sort of makes you feel that no, she doesn't follow facts, but how she sort of encompasses or brings some sanity in that particular family. Now we have Mrs. Sparsit, Barnaby's housekeeper, who's fiercely devoted to her employer but also harbors a deep resentment towards him. And Bitzer, a young man educated in grad grind school who embodies the negative consequences of solely factual education. So when you read it, you will enjoy it. So in the introduction, they talk about fancy as a receptivity, and it was an attribute specially prominent in children. Sissy's untutored response in questions in the schoolroom show more wisdom than the combined learning of adults there present, and it was intimate with an inclination to respond sympathetically to the feelings of others. Now, fancy, Dickens insisted, was not an acquired taste but an inalienable part of being human. For existence, being human. For the hands, it offers relief from the grinding drudgery of their existence. When you're talking about hands or the workers. For Louisa, it represents possibility of fulfillment, not catered for in her father's system. Spontaneity, freedom, release, enjoyment, fellow feeling, contentment with one's lot. These were the values which Dickens associated with fancy, and these were the values which he held up as positive alternatives to the leaden philosophy of fact. And this is where the circus comes in. So throughout you find that circus is very much there with its horses, horse riders, acrobats, and clowns. The circus existed precisely as a stimulus to the vital power of fancy, exotic costumes and skillful tricks, exuberant energy and glittering spectacle provided pleasures which were decidedly non-utilitarian. Instead, they offered an escape from the hardships and cares of daily life and an escape into a fantasy world of glamour, excitement, and novelty. Performing to an audience, it offered shared pleasures with no pretense of instructions or utility, utility, but with the simple and humble purpose of providing amusement. The function is explicitly spelled out by the circus proprietor in Hard Times, Mr. Sleary, when he tells Mr. Grid, people must be amused. He says, they can't always be working and yet they can't always be learning. Make the best of it, not the worst, he wrote. And it's written in that particular English which you have to. So as a child and as an adult, Dickens knew the circus intimately, and virtually every detail in Hard Times about the circus can be documented as historically accurate. Thus, traveling shows at this time performed in wooden booths rather than tents equestrian dramas were a staple. And we find that Dickens' vision of the circus in hard times is historically legitimate, but it is decidedly one sided. The circus did indeed provide entertainment and stimulus to fancy, but was also a highly organized professional business. In a century of massive social transformation, the provision of entertainment was inevitably caught up in the forces of change, developing away from older patterns of spontaneous, gregarious, small scale amusement towards larger, more structured, and more expensive enterprises, themselves precursors of the mass entertainment industry in the 20th century. Of all forms of amusement in the 19th century, the circus is the one which best illustrates the growing commercialization of leisure. So, like this, circus was in a way commercialization of leisure. As such, it was available in to Dickens as an image which could have served as microcosm of an increasingly anonymous bureaucratic urban society which was emerging during his lifetime. That he did not picture it in this way is the clearest possible indication of his intentions in hard times. The circus represents not a practical course of action within existing society, but an alternative attitude, one to replace a widely held dogma which he believed was crushing the human spirit. Utilitarians and political economists, joined by evangelical Christians and Sabbatarians, denounced the very idea of leisure. Dickens vigorously proclaimed its necessity. So, we see that Hard Times is constructed on a series of contrasts between fact and fancy, head and heart, age and youth, work and play, and circus is a key element in this pattern of antagonistic forces. Although the circus personages, apart from Sissy, appear only near the beginning and the end of Hard Times, the attitudes they represent are emphatic throughout the book. In part, this is because the absence of their values is so keenly felt, not only in the poverty, monotony, and ugliness in which the Coketown hands must toil. Again, Coketown hands means Coketown workers must toil, but also in the yawning emptiness of Louisa's heart. Now, overall, just talking about this, like F.R. Leavi's celebrated Hard Times as a moral fable, and this view of the novel has dominated critical response ever since. The very method of Hard Times reinforces Dickens's theme. The stylized characters, theatrical scenes, and expressive prose require the reader to respond imaginatively if he or she is to understand what the author is trying to convey in his work. The subject is based on historical fact, but the treatment is highly fanciful. Like, just for an example, let's take for an example, Mr. Gradgrind's fate is described as a crust of a plum pie. For example, Coketown's buildings look like the painted face of a savage. Such details make no sense at all from the perspective taught in Mr. Gradgrind's school, but they are richly evocative as poetic images. Perhaps the best example of this method occurs in the scene in which Mr. Gradgrind makes Bounderby's offer of marriage known to his daughter. Louisa looks despondently out of the window and remarks of the factory chimneys there that, and I quote, "there seems to be nothing there but languid and monotonous smoke. Yet when the night comes, fire bursts out, father." That's what she said. And if you see that these are examples of form and content are inextricable in his novels. Mr. Gradgrind confesses he does not see the application of the remark, but Dickens's artistry reveals its poignant relevance to Louisa's own life. In this novel, we find an intensely coherence and seriousness of achieved purpose which only the greatest art reveals. Hard Times is a tightly economical work of art in which the functional significance of detail within a carefully wrought structure reveals an artistry sophisticated far beyond that to be found in the rambling adventures of Dickens' early fiction, and a coherence more intense than that of his great social panoramas. So, talking about again the entertainment bit, it is, or the circus. Mr. Sleary is Dickens's spokesman for the necessity of entertainment. And when you're talking about Sissy, he uses Sissy. It is Sissy who embodies these values. It is she who accepts Mr. Gradgrind's patronage. She's loyal to him, but she's impervious to his attempts at indoctrination, and yet she brings grace and warmth to the Stone Lodge, the place. And by her presence, Sissy authenticates the essentially humanizing values which Dickens correlates with an ability to understand why people need circuses or entertainment or something like that. So, in conclusion, the one I'm quoting from, or I've taken ideas from, Simon Callow comments in his book Charles Dickens, which I had earlier posted. He is undoubtedly a monarch of imagination, and according to his and he writes, according to his wishes, his coffin bore the simple inscription Charles Dickens. No further qualifications, explanation was needed. And he says that he wasn't born in poverty, but in a respectable middle class family, and but he had undergone some hardships, and in that he picks up, or he understands what is to be the terrible experiences to tell in his novels about being slavish to toil and dirt, destitution and oppression, and stony-hearted like the cobbled streets out there, breadless people there, and so he was very sensitive to his times, and he had a way about him that it's his uniquely vivid sense of theater which is there in every page of his writing. You can see his people leap off the page as if they were eagerly clambering up onto a stage to strut their stuff. His personal compulsion to perform is present throughout his work. His desire to communicate personally with us, to look us in the eye and thrill us, astonish us, amuse us, is as urgent now as was for his first readers. As long as men and women want to hear stories, Charles Dickens remains and will always be a leading player on the stage of our imagination. Thank you. Must read. I mean, you must read most of the Dickens. It's interesting.